You're listening to CenterD. On today's episode, Donald Trump's first 100 days arrive with bad polling numbers and the damage to the country to match. At the same time, though, Democrats continue to struggle with polling numbers themselves. Our panel: former White House and DHS spokesman Luis Miranda, former Clinton appointee and former senior Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Carl Meacham, and former CBS executive, author, and publicist Jeremy Murphy. Before we begin, a quick introduction. You'll hear more about each of us as we go, but first, the big picture. At a moment when algorithms and social media are driving the national conversation to extremes on both sides of the political spectrum, CenterD is a conversation to bring different perspectives together from the center out. That doesn't mean we won't express a preference on any particular topic. I'm a center Democrat, but we'll call bullshit on both sides as needed. It's fitting that we launched this first episode as Donald Trump has just completed his first 100 days of his second term in office. And what a doozy. So let's start there. Jeremy, you've spent a quarter century protecting and building up brands, and you know what it takes to get good publicity, something the current president seems to be good at, and yet the polls are showing historic lows in his approval rating.
Yeah, so at this point in your administration, you know, the first 100 days, you usually have kind of a honeymoon period, and it's very rare to see someone not have the majority of the country. Trump is now at 44% now, which is not great. 55% of people disapprove of how he's handling the economy, and 34% approve of tariffs, and just 39% on foreign policy. These are really bad numbers for this 100 days into your administration. And by the way, I don't do math. I can't add or subtract, but even I understand these numbers.
And look, and that's a good point, Jeremy. And people understand what this means. These are issues that the president ran on. I do think it's interesting that when you look at the grades from a recent NPR PBS Marist College poll, 45% of Americans give his presidency an F. We're seeing that on screen right now. But when you add the A's and B's, that's still 40%. That's a fascinating thing that really speaks to how divided we are as a country. When you think about just how much damage is being done to our economy, our national security, how our government is being gutted and made inefficient under this administration. Look, even red state Arkansas saw this president deny emergency funding for a natural disaster. Arkansas. Carl, you served in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as senior staff on the Republican side under Senator Dick Lugar. You know, you've worked closely with folks on both sides now. What are you hearing?
Well, we're hearing, it's been 100 days since the president returned. And, depending on who you ask, America is either being rescued or dismantled. For many of his supporters, the early moves feel like long overdue corrections. The rollback of DEI programs, the crackdown on what they see is ideological bias in universities, and efforts to shrink the government, along with Elon Musk, were things that, his base of folks called for. Critics, Democrats generally on the other side, feel unsettled. They worry about the erosion of institutional guard lines, about the speed and scale of executive action, and about where all this is leading. I think the facts as far as, poll numbers were mentioned, but I think it's important to highlight, feelings matter more than facts right now. And people aren't responding to data. They're responding to what this moment says about who we are and where we're going. And for some, this means to returning to strength and clarity. And for others, it feels like a rupture, a break from the norms that once defined American democracy. Wherever you stand politically, what's clear is it's something deeper than policies unfolding. And I think it's only just beginning.
Well, I worked in television for years, and I was at the network that competed with The Apprentice. And one thing you can say, Trump does not understand government. He does not understand most things, but he does understand ratings. The man knew the ratings of The Apprentice better than anybody else. He knew the demographics. He knew the lead-in numbers. He knew the trajectory. So he's got to understand these numbers.
You also have to look at some of the demographic trends in terms of the numbers that are surprising. We had seen from 2020 to 2024, Trump actually boosted his support among 18 to 29-year-olds from 36% to 47%. Now that's dropping off precipitously. You're seeing basically a net negative of about 29 points, which is pretty substantial. But of course, Democrats still have their own problems. They're seeing historically high disapproval ratings as well, congressional Democrats, that is. Democrats are still in the wilderness too. And so people also are not seeing a clear alternative. And, you're starting to see flashes of it. You see Governor J.B. Pritzker's speech in New Hampshire last weekend calling for protests and for people speaking out. You see Bernie Sanders and AOC. Senator Sanders was actually teasing the president about his 100-day event in Michigan, pointing out that they got a crowd size twice as big just a couple of weeks ago than the one that he got for his 100-day event. But it also speaks to the lack of alternatives and how Democrats are still kind of stumbling around in trying to figure out what they say next. I saw one of the lines that's coming out is that the first 100 days has been the most corrupt. But I'm not sure that that's going to resonate with people yet, because you haven't really been able to explain what Trump is actually doing. I think where he's winning right now is that he's telling you, and he's trying to present this aura that he's done a great job on so many different things. I think border security is the perfect example. But when you actually get in there and take a look at what's happening, the numbers were already lower than the monthly average in 2019 during his last administration when he took office. The reality is that you have Homeland Security investigations, which is supposed to be investigating the cartels, going after those who are bringing in fentanyl, child exploitation, those kinds of crimes. Instead of doing those investigations, they're picking up gay barbers and shipping them off to El Salvador. So that, I think, is also something where Democrats are going to have to realize that they can't just accept Donald Trump's narrative on a lot of these issues, including on border security and immigration. And they're going to have to get better at presenting that alternative if they're going to hope to be able to make any kind of headway.
You look at the numbers or the ratings Trump gets, he's to be graded on an A, B, C, D, or F. I mean, that's the only language Trump understands. I'm surprised it didn't come with a crayon and a sippy cup. It's just the guy doesn't even read. So I don't think he can explain his policies.
Yeah, but again, we're going back to this whole issue of facts. And I think I don't want to generalize, but on the left, you seem to be more interested in being right and not in doing what you need to do to get power. And Donald Trump really doesn't care about these perspectives. I think a lot of supporters of Donald Trump don't care about these perspectives either. They care about some of these issues that have long been troubling them. The issue of DEI, a lot of folks in parts of the country that aren't major urban centers, right, more homogeneous parts of the country, felt like they were on the bad end of DEI. So they see this as being pushback. They're no longer guaranteed jobs at certain places, and they see what Donald Trump is doing as being something positive for them. The immigrant issue is another one that they see, and they've always linked that conversation to people being lawbreakers, right? Equating it to lawbreakers. So you see a lot of 80-20 issues, right? Where I think 80% of the public agrees, right? But 20% don't like the way that it's been done. But the bottom line is that he's getting the job done. And that's kind of how he sees it. We're moving away from parties to movements. These are political movements. And I would like to see, just to wrap it up and not belabor and go on and on and on, I think Democrats need to understand they don't want to be a Trump light. So what's the alternative? What is their vision or view or option as a party that can say, hey, we understand what Donald Trump was doing, but here we can do this better, and we are willing to do things in order to get your vote that others aren't.
Well, I think Democrats are learning that Trump as a boogeyman is not an effective campaign policy. I mean, they tried the first time, didn't win. They tried, obviously Biden won the second time, but the third time, again, everybody knew who Donald Trump was, and he still won. So using him as a campaign tool didn't really work. I think Elon Musk and I think the Doge, or whatever the hell they call themselves, I think that's going to be effective. But Frank Luntz, who I love, he said, Democrats never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and I think that's what's going to happen. I mean, I don't think they're very coordinated, and I don't think they have a central message or someone to carry it. I mean, I can't tell you who the stars in the Democratic Party are right now.
And I think, Carl, you make a really good point that we've moved away from parties to movements. And that's part of the frustration that the public has, is that they look at this and they think about who is the Democratic leader? Why is the Democratic Party not stopping Trump? And part of the reason, it's twofold. One is we don't have strong party systems in the United States. I think there's sort of this misunderstanding that the parties have great control. And the reality is that people are members of the party, but we're largely driven by personalities and specific political leaders. And the second part of it is that when you are not in control of any specific chamber, we don't control the House, we don't control the Senate. Democrats are not in the control where they can do a lot to stop a lot of the things that we're seeing.
Yeah, but I don't buy that. I mean, I spent 12 years in the U.S. Senate, and part of that time was under the leadership of Mitch McConnell, and he was in the minority, and he made Democrats see, unicorns, or whatever the right term would be, in using the parliamentary system to obstruct effectively. I think Democrats can do the same thing. I don't think that it's beyond them to make things harder to hold nominations if they need to hold nominations, to hold certain bills. I mean, you have the reconciliation process is coming, and there's going to be some key votes on the debt limit. There's things that are coming up that are opportunities for Democrats to be able to demonstrate their views. I do think that Cory Booker did, I think, a really important thing when he gave his 24-hour filibuster speech, saying basically that it's not up to us. We need the public's help if we're going to turn this thing around. The only problem is that the call that he made seemed to have been unheard. And this is something that I think, talking to Jeremy a little bit before the show started, I don't know how much it's going to take for people to understand that the problems they have with Donald Trump and some of the serious issues that threaten how we live will only be changed if people get off their butts. And I think that that's something that, again, it goes away from the parties, Luis, to the people and the movement. And what is that movement, and how are Democrats helping spark that movement?
Well, I also think Democrats are making some very stupid mistakes. I mean, they can't get out of their own way. I mean, there was just something about AOC going to a rally, or something about income inequality, and she took a private jet. Or you remember, during the campaign, Kamala Harris mentioned that she'd worked at McDonald's. Well, no one could confirm that, and then it became a thing. And Trump did that famous photo of him working the drive-thru, serving at McDonald's or some fast food restaurant. These are mistakes that they get tripped on, and it just sucks all the oxygen out of what they want to say and becomes a thing. Democrats first have to get out of their own way and stop making these stupid mistakes, because that overshadows what their message is.
And Jeremy, that's a really fascinating point, because some of these are not mistakes. I think, flying in a private jet to an event about income inequality certainly is a mistake. But in some of the other situations, you look at the McDonald's point, the reality is that they're very good at making things up and trying to prove a negative. And that is, I think, a big challenge that Democrats have, is that they get caught up in it and they allow it to become an issue. Again, I think Donald Trump has actually done a lot that is actually damaging the country. Corruption and the way in which all of these billionaires are basically neutralizing either investigations or greasing the wheels of the things that they need from a regulatory perspective by virtues of the relationship with Donald Trump. But I don't think that Democrats can rely just on that. And look, the thing that Democrats will tell you often, and that a lot of politicians will tell you, is that, you've got to really dumb things down for voters. I don't think that's entirely true. I think when you look at it, just this week, you saw the NFL fined the Falcons for a leak of a Shedeur Sanders cell phone number during the draft. And that became a big story, and the American public gets that. They watch, Sunday Night Football, and they're able to track the stats and the breakdowns and, the injuries, and they know how their fantasy football team is doing and all of the nuance and detail that goes into that. Don't tell me that the American public can't process more complicated ideas. But I think that's where Democrats are going to have to step up because, even Carl, you were presenting Trump as if he's actually getting a lot done. I think he's good at saying he's getting things done. When you look at it, it's not actually working. He's not actually getting things done that work. He's deporting 4-year-old American citizens with cancer without their meds. And so when you actually challenge some of the things that he says he's doing, you see that there's a lot there that isn't actually happening.
Yeah, but Dems are really big into virtue signaling and being, trying to be this image of perfection, which then, as Jeremy mentioned with AOC and the plane, can easily be taken apart. I think one of the issues that we're missing here is not the fourth grade language or anything, but just who is a figure on the Democratic side that that gets people interested, goes beyond sort of party interest, and that there's a reaction, there's an excitement to it. I think some of that you're seeing, Bernie Sanders and AOC are doing some interesting stuff, but it's very, very partisan. It's not reaching across the aisle. I think Donald Trump it's a TV show, man. It's not even like what you're thinking about the substance. And I highlighted to you, Luis, the areas that you've seen changes in. DEI, you have seen changes in that. What he's doing with the universities. These are things that are getting a lot of attention, a lot of eyes, right? But then how you mentioned what's happening with El Salvador, for instance, or those abductions. Americans only care about these things when it affects Americans. So if you had John Smith from Omaha, Nebraska, married to somebody that was an illegal immigrant, and it galvanized the attention because it wasn't the other that was being highlighted, I think you'd have a very different response, Luis. But as far as people looking at these situations, they're still able to say, oh, that's not me. That's an immigrant. It's not me. It's not my house. It's not the things that are, common to real Americans. And I think as long as Democrats are using those examples, they're still going to be, on the outside of the discussion. They need to make these discussions resonate with people in the heartland, in the Rust Belt, with with a homogeneous white public, as well as with a heterogeneous sort of environment like New York City. I think the challenge is bigger with Democrats. But just to close this point, a lot of folks in the Democratic Party feel that they should be moving away from the identitarian conversation and just focusing on the economic conversation. I think it's something that's percolating in the Democratic Party, but you have to get to some closure so you can fight this fight.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point, because if it's 1992's presidential election all over again, Bill Clinton's it's the economy stupid is really where Democrats sort of lost their way, is when they've lost focus on that. I think you see that in a lot of indicators after the Great Recession in 2008 that began under George W. Bush. The Obama administration bailed out banks. People were frustrated by that. People lost their homes at the same time, but the banks got bailed out. You had the Occupy Wall Street movement, and there was never really a resolution around that. And as you said, Democrats spreading their message thin by trying to cover just too many bases. But I do think it's starting to affect regular or, in the center part of the country. You look in Oklahoma, there was actually a family that was raided of U.S. citizens. ICE made a mistake, went into the wrong house. The daughters of the family were all forced to go stand out in T-shirts in the rain. And so I think people are going to start seeing this affecting them. And yet, when you look at where Democrats are, they're still seeing that Trump has significant support. I don't think we can take Gretchen Whitmer, governor's hug of Donald Trump as anything other than an indicator that she's still seeing that, it was a deadly mistake for Chris Christie in when he ran for president, that he had hugged Barack Obama after Obama helped New Jersey recover from Hurricane Sandy. But you're right. I think Democrats need to focus on the economy. They need to do it from a centrist perspective where it doesn't seem like radical ideas. But they also have to show that what Donald Trump is doing is failing. I know people are rattled by tariffs, but a lot of them are still giving him the benefit of the doubt. I think that's got to change.
I mean, honestly, the Whitmer hugging thing I think is ridiculous. I think Democrats need to grow up. She still has to govern her state. And, everybody knows that showing Trump flattery and hugging him will work. It'll turn the spigots on. And she has to take care of her state. So that is such a stupid... I hope they don't make that thing an issue. And Carl, what you were saying before,
tell it to Governor Huckabee Sanders. Tell it to Governor Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas, who just saw the Trump administration deny her state, her very, very red state, emergency funding after a natural disaster.
Well, she got to start hugging then. But Carl, what you were saying, I thought was really interesting about it affecting, Joe Sixpack, the average person. And I think one of the things that Republicans did very well was the trans swim issue, the man who became women and was swimming against people. And so many of my friends who are Democrats have children that compete in sports, and that really resonated with them. They don't want someone coming in unfairly and beating their daughter. And Republicans really seized on that. And that was an issue that hits everybody. And first of all, I think they blew it up completely out of proportion. But it hit home for a lot of people. So Democrats got to find those.
Yeah, and I think it's important to caveat that the reality is that it affects a tiny number of people, a tiny number of cases in the country. And yet people, to your point, voted on that. I've spoken to friends where they raised that issue with me. And I said, look, you had kids at a school where people were shot to death. Students and teachers were shot to death. We're seeing that happening over and over again. And yet you're voting on because there was one kid who competed somewhere in the country on the team who happened to be transgender. I think if they're very effective at that, but we have to show those contrasts. We don't need to focus just on defending trans kids from abuse and harassment. We also have to zoom out and say, wait a second. You should be more worried about the kids that are getting shot at schools, who are, in drills every day all over the country somewhere, because there's a real risk that because Republicans refuse to do anything about common sense gun safety.
I'm going to say something on purpose to highlight something. It's a very personal issue for you, Luis, because your high school was affected by it. Where you went to high school in Florida was, what was the name of the high school?
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School.
Right. It happened to your high school. So it's very personal to you. Now, one of the things with the trans issue, the way that they highlighted it and the way that it was sold was something very personal. What happens if your daughter was competing against a guy? Could she win or not? No. And this is why the Democrats are out of touch, because they're for they, them, and not for you. That was the commercial. It was straight up. The gun issue, Luis, needs to be personalized, and then you need to do the work that Republicans have been doing in school boards to make sure that certain things change at the local level for decades, and focused efforts to push an agenda. I have not seen that happen with Democrats on issues of import to them. I've not seen that. So I think a lot of the Republican work is now yielding fruit. And this has happened with the Tea Party. The Tea Party sort of started that reaction to Barack Obama. We all are familiar with what happened. Barack Obama was elected. The Republicans came together with a committee to try to figure out how they would deal with this, because they felt the country now is going to vote for people that don't fit the sort of frame that Republicans fit before, right? The profile. What are we going to do? Guess what they did? They doubled down and they went to work on issues that they cared about. Democrats haven't done that. So now we're in 2025. What are the efforts going to be that can switch the game, quickly? I don't know if it's going to be quick, Luis and Jeremy. I think that this is going to require some work. It might be a midterm project. I don't know what's going to happen in the short term. And I think that Democrats need to be thinking about that. Instead of thinking about the quick fix, they need to think about what's the long-term set of changes that they can make in order to garner power and have it last.
I always go back to the first Trump election with Hillary, and the Republicans were so smart in making it simple. Their slogan was "Make America Great Again." What was Hillary's? You probably don't remember. Louis, you probably do, and most people in politics do, but most people don't. Stronger together. What does that mean? First of all, the people voting didn't think we were strong and didn't think we were together, but they wanted to see America great again. It was so simple, and it said everything. And I think Democrats need to start thinking that way.
It's also so cynical because it's interesting to me that the Republican Party has succeeded by essentially telling the American people just how awful America is to get them to vote Republican, and yet at the same time attacking Democrats for suggesting that we're a great country that can achieve great things. It's a really fascinating way that they've been able to turn that around.
It's cultural. This is not factual. I remember back in 2004, when you had Kerry run against Bush, and we had 9/11, but then, we had the wars coming. People would talk about voting for Bush because they could see themselves going and having a beer with him over having a beer with Kerry. And Kerry was, a Vietnam War vet, led the student movement against Vietnam when he came back, testified in Congress, had done some heroic stuff. And had the facts on his side in many of these discussions when it had to do with the war in the Middle East, right? But they just brought it down to, I think Bush is going to protect us better, and I could go and have a beer with Bush. There has to be a figure on the Democratic Party. The last figure that I remember on the Democratic Party, and I have a bias, is Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was that figure that he would always say, he's a little red or he's a little blue. He was from Arkansas. He had this understanding that could transcend party. He had to deal with Newt Gingrich, a little bit like that whole Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan thing. The question is, how do we get back to those figures? And right now, I think so much of it is cultural. There seems to be an allergy against cosmopolitanness. So if you're a cosmopolitan person, you are the most cosmopolitan in the way that Republicans have now chosen to sort of depict Democrats is that they're the snooty people from the Ivy League school that aren't in touch with real America. I don't know what the counter narrative has been by Democrats. I do see them fighting for a lot of the same issues that they lost on in the current election, and they seem to be doubling down on these issues. There has to be a reexamination of what's going on. Some of it has to do with how you sell it, sure, but other things have to do with the emphasis. And you lost the unions. That was a Democrat.
Well, Louis and I, we grew up down in South Florida, and went to college in the same county as Mar-a-Lago. And you can ask any blue-collar worker, plumber, electrician, painter, they've all been screwed by Donald Trump. He has screwed everybody on their invoices. The average working man got screwed by Donald Trump. And yet, he's got these people in the bag in terms of voting. They're the ones who think he's for them. Donald Trump's not for them.
They've done a good job of pretending like Donald Trump is the champion of the working class, when the reality is he's screwing over the working class the same way he did as a businessman. Because what you're talking about is how he screwed people over in the private sector, in his casinos, where small businesses. There was one great story about a small business that was providing pianos for his casinos, and basically refused to pay them. Take me to court, he would say. That was always his approach. It's incredibly damaging to the small business, but also to the people who work for those small businesses. And that's how he's running the economy. It's about how does he help the billionaires get richer and the average person gets screwed in the process. Carl, you're absolutely right that they are relitigating the same issues that they lost on in the campaign. But I do think it's important that on some of the issues, when Donald Trump is saying that he's actually done something, the Democrats do have to be able to challenge that. They do have to be able to show that the reality is different. So you can't just let things go uncontested. When he says he won 3 presidential elections, you can't let that stand. No, he lost in 2020. When he says that he has accomplished what he's done on immigration, you have to challenge him. The removal numbers are the same as they were under Biden at the change of the administration. You cannot leave those things unchallenged.
He does what he wants to. How are you going to answer that? I do what I want. I'm the stronger one. I do what I want.
And he's going to do that. But
Luis, then you said, and this is why it's wrong. And I understand that. And I'm not saying this as someone who agrees with this approach, Luis, but I'm just saying, highlighting the effectiveness of it. I do what I want because I can.
And I'm not disagreeing with you there. What I'm saying is that when he says that I do what I want and look, it's having results, actually it's not. The number of people that ICE has removed is actually less in his first 3 months than it was in the last 3 months of the Biden administration.
Right.
So I'm not disagreeing with you that he's going to say, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. He's going to keep doing that. But we can't sit back and not challenge things that are abjectly false, because the media is willing to go along with some of this. They're not able to challenge him. They'll tell you that he's succeeding on the borders. We need to zoom that out. And look, we're going to have a broader immigration explainer that really breaks down what's happened at the borders and how that's doing that. We'll have a video that does that. But I think the idea that we challenge him on the things that he's saying and on the sort of general perception is important. The reality is Biden had the most secure borders in history by the end of his term, because we had never had the number of personnel, resources, technology, infrastructure, relationships with other countries, intelligence. You had all of this put together. The Republicans were very effective. Donald Trump was very effective at saying that it was the worst border that there had ever been. But that's like me asking you, how good was your iPhone in 2006 compared to your iPhone now? Well, there wasn't even any such thing as an iPhone or a smartphone in 2006. The evolution of border security from the year 2000 to 2001, when we saw the 9/11 attacks, to 2003, when DHS gets created, to now is night and day. You have one of the world's most professional and best trained law enforcement organizations, technology, AI-powered surveillance along the border, aerial surveillance. It is night and day. Before 2013, a majority of people who tried to cross the border actually succeeded. During the Trump 1 and Biden administrations, we were able to stop roughly 80% of them. That's a huge difference when you think about that. But he was not challenged when he came out and said that it was the worst that it had ever been. And certainly the news crews showing some of the things that were happening as people were crossing certainly didn't help, because it did show that there's a difficult situation on the southwest border. But that situation has been there for a long time. And so we have to challenge those notions. Sure. And then you can sort of say, so, he's lying to you. Look, this reminds me of a great movie that I love. We grew up in the 80s and the action films were all the rage. And there was a terrific movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Some people will argue with me on whether it was a terrific movie, but it was called The Running Man.
Amazing movie. I love it.
Thank you. In The Running Man, you have a situation where Arnold Schwarzenegger gets arrested for a crime he did not commit and put in a horrible prison. And then the way that they make a deal with him to let him out is that he has to compete on this game show. And on that game show, if he wins a series of, brutal attacks from American Gladiator style foes, then he could, win his freedom and be off vacationing on a great island. And in that movie, the rebels of sort eventually break into the major TV station at the time, and they publish videos of what those previous season winners actually look like, and they're all cadavers. They're all dead. Last year's winner, and there's a bunch of dead people.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do is say, wait a second, you're being lied to. He's not the Don. He's the con. He is Donald Trump. He is lying to you.
So just very quickly, and I feel right, obviously, on all the substance, but when you're explaining, you're losing. And the American public just reads the headline. They're not reading the second and third and fourth paragraphs of that story. The other issue, and that's just reality. The other issue is we have to stop responding and putting out issues for the other side to respond. You have to be in the driver's seat of the discussion. This is something that I think Democrats need to become better at. They're interested in responding to what he's doing at the border. They're interested in responding on what's happening with DEI. Same thing with tariffs. Same thing with free trade. Why aren't they leading the discussion in getting the other side to respond to them? Go back to the Bill Clinton thing. And that goes with what you're saying about the economy. There has to be sort of this consistent effort to get the other side on the weak side of the argument, responding. And I think that's where Donald Trump has been quite effective. He's getting Democrats to have to respond to him, and he's leading the charge. And you can say that it's because he's president, because he has a majority in Congress. You can say all that, which is true. But we're in the times of social media, man. There are so many outlets out there that you can mess with and ways to make people respond. So just something to highlight there. And I love, highlighting the Running Man and our trivia from the 80s when we were little kids.
By the way, the best line in that movie was when Schwarzenegger is in the interrogation booth and someone comes in and introduces someone else and says, "This is your court-appointed theatrical agent." I was like, that was awesome.
I didn't even remember that line. That's a great one.
Great movie.
Yeah.
To close this out, Jeremy, your second book was published late last year. It's hitting audiobook virtual shelves this week. Too Good to Fact Check, a memoir where you spend each chapter recounting adventures crisscrossing the globe with celebrities for CBS Watch magazine for what can only be described as extravagant photo shoots. But what you did there was you were helping bring actors and their shows to new audiences. Tell us a little bit about your second book and why you're excited that the audiobook version is out.
Well, yeah. So the book is about my decade running a magazine called CBS Watch Magazine, which was custom published magazine, and it was kind of Vanity Fair for TV viewers. Because a lot of the magazines at that point ignored TV. TV was like the second, it was the ugly medium. It was, the real stars were on film, and gradually, like shows like Mad Men, water cooler shows started taking that luster away from movies. And so I was at CBS Television, and we were very fortunate. We had CSI, Two and a Half Men. We had the top shows on television. And so we created this magazine that took those actors from your favorite shows, and we brought them to exotic destinations, hired like great photographers like Patrick de Marchelier and Ellen von Unwerth, and we really gave them the Vogue Vanity Fair treatment. And a lot of that, and the absurdity that came with it. I mean, the money was unbelievable that we got to play with, hundreds of thousands of dollars, not as, extravagant as Condé Nast with Vanity Fair and Vogue, but we got up there, and there's great story in that, and there's a lot of humor in that, and, it really captured the glory days of glossy magazines when they really set the culture.
Jeremy, you sang the Ted Koppel. You were with Harrison Ford, disappointed because he was one of your heroes in film, and you were disappointed on your trip. What's your favorite anecdote in this book?
Oh boy, there's a lot of them. Well, Ted Koppel, I got really, really drunk at a bar, and I was with my publisher, and I saw Ted Koppel, and I was like, oh, I have to say hi to him. And my publisher knew I was kind of, three sheets to the wind, and said, please don't. Anyways, I went up to Ted Koppel as he's leaving. I'm like, Mr. Koppel, Nightline was my favorite show growing up. And he's like, well, thank you, young man. And I'm like, and your theme song. I love the theme song. And he's looking at me like, what? And I'm like, can I sing it to you? And he goes, I hope you don't. And I go, do, 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 do. And he summoned security. So that's just one of it. And then I was at another lounge, and Mary J. Blige was there, and she was sitting across from us. And again, I had a little too much to drink, and I said, Mary J., no more pain, no more drama. And she Whitneyed me. She looked at me, she goes, and I'm like, I'm sorry, Mary J. Blige. So it's got a lot of those stories. I mean, the funny thing is, I was the worst. A lot of people think celebrities are out of control. It was me. And so I found great humor in that.
You know, it's going to be exciting, and you're going to bump into famous people, and Jeremy's going to probably do something that will make the night memorable. So we're hanging out with Jeremy.
Yeah, that's right. So too good to fact check. There you have it. Too good to fact check. Flying the skies with stars, scotch, and scandal. Mostly mine or yours in this case, as I read here from the cover. Jeremy Murphy with Sophia Palmier, who is your co-author and who we look forward to having on the show at some point as well. We'll see you all next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Centered. Subscribe and stay tuned. Lots more happening. Lots more to cover. See you next time.